you're not a fan of digital.
No, not well. Yes and no.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
I mean, it's a wonderful tool, but it has a very negative effect on the emotional transmission.
You were speaking about you created RealFeel.
RealFeel, yeah.
And RealFeel, is that a solution for?
Yes.
Okay.
For the stress caused by digital audio.
You were saying digital is kind of out of balance, and it had.
Well, okay. Let me be specific.
What is
okay.
this?
So digital audio has the identical effect on the central nervous system as fluorescent lights, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but I've never met anybody who likes fluorescent lights.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. You're such a weirdo. So that was my first clue. Like for the first 5 years, what happened was we went to this demonstration of the SoundStream digital tape recorder. It was the very, very first one. So I think this was 1978. So myself and 2 other producers and 3 engineers went to this thing in Santa Monica to this demonstration, right? So we go in there, we're in there for like a half hour, 45 minutes, and we're all saying, oh my God, listen how the noise floor is so low and the clarity and all these kind of things, all the good parts, right? So we all came in separate cars, and so when we left, we're walking to the parking lot, and one of the guys says, it sounds good and everything, but something bugs me about it. And then he opened Pandora's box and everybody said, I know, I can't put my finger on it, but something does bug me about it. And so we all just agreed that something bugged us about it, got in our cars and left. This is like in April, right?
Yeah.
So in September, I think it was, of that year, there was an AES convention in New York, okay? So, and at that AES convention, on the showroom floor were all the digital multi-track tape recorders that were gonna go on sale in January, right? And so this guy, Dr. John Diamond from Australia, he was a psychiatrist, and he wrote a book called Your Body Doesn't Lie. And the muscle test that we did earlier, he would do that, but with it was all about visual images, photographs and paintings and various things, and about whether it was life energy increasing or decreasing, like the effect that art has on you. And then he got into this with music, right? And so so he was using classical music, vinyl records, and he would take a room with 12 people, and he would take, let's see, their brainwave frequency, their body temperature, their blood pressure, and their pulse rate, and he would feed those into a computer, and he wrote a program, and then it would spit it out as various things, and one of the things was stress, right? So anyway, so one day he puts on this vinyl record, and the stress indicators go up to 500% on everybody, and he thought, something must be wrong with the equipment, right? And so he's messing around with it and can't figure anything out. So he just decides to give up on that, takes a record he used the previous week and puts it on, and everything's normal. He thinks, that's strange, right? So then about 6 weeks go by and people would send him records, and every so often a record would come in during that period and the stress indicators would go up to 500% again. And he said, well, these things obviously all have something in common, right? And he does a little research. They were all recorded on that SoundStream tape recorder that we heard that day.
Okay.
It was digital, right?
Yeah.
And so, because there was no multi-tracks, and so the only people that used digital in the beginning were classical records, because they often go straight to 2-track, right? Mm-hmm. So he writes a paper, a white paper, and he delivers it at the AES convention. And so it caused a near riot. And there were these guys, and there were these things at the AES. These lectures are usually like 30% attended, or 40%. Well, this was like elbow to elbow. There were 200 people in this room. Right. And he was on this stage with a podium, and he had a SoundStream, and he had an Ampex 440, a 2-track analog, right? And so anyway, so he goes up there and he starts talking, and there's electricity in there in this room, And there are these guys in the gray suits with the red bow ties, these design engineer guys with the Mont Blanc pens and stuff. And so anyway, and I never heard anybody swear at the AES. I was an AES member for many, many years. It was so conservative, right? So anyway, these guys jumped up and started yelling, fuck you, and they're throwing their pens at him, and he's ducking and diving, and the place started to go nuts, and they had to bring security in. And so Harry Pearson, that started the Absolute Sound, that audiophile magazine, was there, and he wrote a 5-page article about this. And he talks about what I told you about John Diamond in Australia, and then he also describes this whole event that happened at the AES, right? So anyway, they got everybody calmed down, and then, and these guys are still yelling at him, come up to our suite, we'll show you, and there's all this kind of crazy energy in the air. And then he brought people up from the audience and muscle tested them, right? So a guy comes up and he plays the identical music, you know, on the sound, on the digital and the analog. It has them in sync too, right? And then he A/Bs and then he muscle tests and you know, so the first guy, he tests strong on the analog, weak on the digital. Nobody wanted to believe it. I would say 50 people went up there.
And this is what we did out there beforehand.
And 50 people that day went up there to get tested one after another because nobody would believe it, right?
Yeah.
And then finally everybody's like, okay. So anyway, this thing went on for an hour and a half, whatever it was. But the thing about this was, when it was over, I remembered that day when we were walking to the parking lot, right? And I said to myself, you know what, there is something wrong with this, right? Well, that was the first time I had something to grab onto to know that there was a problem, other than what we imagined. So then I thought, okay, something needs to be done about this, but I had no clue what to do, right? Now remember, this is 1980, right? So now CDs didn't come out till 1985. Okay, so now I'm at Island Records at the time. I had made this record, and Brian,
You were vice president or whatever?
yeah, I was senior vice president of Island. I was like Blackwell's right-hand person, right? So I didn't have a title really. I just vice president, not of anything, just,
Right.
you know. Anyway, so anyway, and Ry Cooder had a similar experience to what I'm about to tell you, and I'll explain what that is. Well, I'll tell you Ry's story first. So he did Down in Hollywood. That record has Down in Hollywood on it. It was done on a Mitsubishi multi-track digital tape machine, right?
Okay.
And it was the first record ever made on a digital multi-track, right?
Right.
So, and Ry's very critical about sound and everything. So he goes home and he's got the, you know, they mixed it and done the whole thing, and and I think they cut a disc, I think, you know. And so he puts the thing on and listens to it, and he told me, you know, he said, I don't know, it was bugging me, something, I didn't like it really. He said, so I decided to put on Bebop-A-Lula. And he put that on, and the difference was so striking. He took that ref of the one that he did on the Mitsubishi and threw it across the room. He said, "Get this shit out of here," you know. And he freaked out, and he didn't want to put the record out, right? I don't know what they ended up putting it out anyway. So what happened to me was, I had finished this record, and I got my first CD, and so I was familiar with my sound system at home. So I went home from the office and I put it on, and I sat on the couch. And I was in the state of shock. It came on, and I didn't recognize it. I was just, emotionally,
Yeah.
I was just like, what? And I sat on that couch and cried for 15 minutes.
I
mean,
understand this.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And I thought, now what? Because I make all my decisions when I produce records based upon feel.
Yeah.
And that's what goes first with digital, is the emotional part. The feel sound is a problem. The sound is a problem because the relationship between the peaks and the average changes. When they convert from analog to digital, the peaks get 3 to 4 dB louder. That's why people think digital sounds pokier to their ears. It has nothing to do with treble or bass or EQ whatsoever. It's this relationship of the peaks and the RMS, which I built into RealFeel to fix that and get that relationship back in place, right? That's why when you watch movies on streaming, everybody talks about this, how you're jockeying your remote control all the time to hear the dialogue.
Yeah.
You know what the reason for that is?
What is that?
The loudest thing in the mix is going to be the sound effects and the music. The dialogue is not the loudest thing in the mix. So what happens is the dialogue goes down 3 to 4 dB compared to, you know, relatively speaking, and that's why you can't hear the dialogue.
Let me ask you this. In the mastering end of it, mastering is so critical.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, you could just kill a record.
Yeah.
So many, well, let's go to the Keith Jarrett albums.
Yeah.
Okay, ECM.
Oh, ECM. Oh, best.
Yeah, but Keith Jarrett always wanted it
Level down.
level down.
Yeah.
And I get those records and I go, well, I just got done listening to a Jan Gabarek album, and I listen to this, and now I have to go over and turn
it up.
Turn it up. I couldn't figure out what was going through his head. Why he wanted it down so low, because now, I mean, I put a waveform up off of a digital thing, and I pull it out, and if it's a Taylor Swift or something, it's just like that.
Yeah, it looks like a 2x4.
Yeah, it's just a 2x4. It's just one band.
Yeah.
And there's no
dynamics.
There's no dynamics.
Yeah.
And they don't want it that way.
Right.
Because it has to always hit you.
Right.
And the artfulness of you wrote about that. You have talked about that.
Well, you know what's really interesting?
Yeah.
There was an article in the Austin Statesman.
Okay.
Many years ago now, I can't remember when, about the volume wars. The article's called Volume Wars. Like if you Google it, right?
Okay.
You put Austin Statesman Volume Wars. It's a really good article. So what they found out was that when you start to change the relationship of dynamics, like say you're walking down the street and there's cars and there's noises and whatever it is. There's a thing that occurs in real life that's like natural, right? Of course. But the minute you start messing around with it, it puts red flags up in the brain. And so when you get to a certain point with that, what happens is the sound literally goes in one ear and out the other. Like, it doesn't register. When you get the thing too compressed, it doesn't stick.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't even realize that. And the other thing too is that the fact that the more you compress it, it doesn't breathe, and it's like,
Well, it sort of falls into, it all becomes one straight storyline.
right, and also everything's in your face.
That's what I mean, it's
when
in
you're
your
listening
face.
to
Yeah,
it. Like,
yeah.
you don't have that depth, and the dimensional thing starts to go, right?
Okay.
Because it's all squashed up in the front, and it's much less of a nice experience. I mean, it's
So what do you do with RealFeel? Because that's what we heard with the,
what we were just listening to.
yeah, we listened in there, but when you played Last Waltz.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and you were coming through the Tetris, which sounded amazing.
Yeah.
Now, was that RealFeel?
Yes, it is. Now, okay, so what I do with
Feels
RealFeel...
technology.
What I do with RealFeel is this. Okay, when I master a record, at first I take the mix and I put RealFeel on it.
Okay.
Then I master the record, right?
Oh, you do this beforehand.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
what does it do?
you could put it on, what I was playing you was an existing CD that I put it on,
Right.
and that works too, but it's much better to put it on
Well,
first.
what is it doing?
Okay, what it's doing, well, it's sort of a trade secret in a weird way,
Okay.
but but I'll explain it.
All right.
Okay, what's happening is this, okay? This is given a lot away in a certain way, but anyway, okay, there's samples, right? And these samples have gaps between them.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just take a CD, that's 44,100 samples per second, right?
Yeah.
So let's just say you got 100 cycles, right? That means there's 441 samples at 100 cycles, right? The math, right? Yeah. Okay. So that means there's a certain space between those samples. Now at 20,000 cycles, there's only 2¼ samples, right? So the spaces between those samples are huge. Okay, so as you go up in frequency, those spaces get bigger and bigger, right?
Right.
So now there's what they call dither. Now dither is noise. So here's the deal. So if the dither wasn't in there, what would happen is the amplitude of the sample, it would go from this, the amplitude would be up here, and then the space between, it would drop all the way down,
Right.
and then it would come all the way back up. And so that would be too drastic. Like you'd hear sort of a faint clicking sound, if you will, but because these things are so infinitesimal, sort of, they're really infinitesimal when you get into DXD and all that stuff. That's 10.6 million samples a second, but this is 44,000. Okay, so what happens is they put that noise in there. You can't tell it's noise, but it keeps that amplitude up there. So you don't have this amplitude thing going back. That's why they had to do that. The brain knows that is not music in between those samples. So what I figured out was how to put music in there instead of dither.
Okay, so this is the process.
Yeah, so that's what it's doing, actually. So the brain thinks it's analog, but if you put it on an oscilloscope, it still has the stair-step thing.
Oh, okay.
And my wife would say, RealFeel feels fantastic. She says, but when you put on an analog vinyl record, it's more liquid sounding, and that's a very good word. I mean, she picked that word, excellent word, right? And that's something that RealFeel kind of addresses that, but it can't fix it completely. It's impossible. Right. I mean, it's just the nature of the situation. And the other crazy thing about this is that I was wondering way in the early days, I thought the Japanese invented it or whatever it was, but guess what? It's PCM, pulse-coded modulation. It came out of Bell Laboratories in 1937 and was made for Morse code compression between the two world wars.
Amazing.
And so they co-opted this. Instead of designing something from the ground up, they just grabbed this and used it, and it was a big mistake. And what's really interesting, this is most interesting, is that it's the exact thing that happened with the vinyl record repeating itself. So when the vinyl record came out, it was a ceramic cartridge. It was made from a crystal, okay, and it had horrible frequency response, right? So they had to come up with the RIAA curve. Mm-hmm. And so it's literally like a diagonal line. Like the high frequencies are way up here and the low frequencies are way, the response of that cartridge. So the RIAA curve is the inverse of that. So that's why, like when you walk across the room and say you don't have the grills cloth on your speakers, like you're in college or something, you got a stereo, and and the thing's turned up loud, and you walk, and maybe no music's playing, you walk across the room, or maybe it is, and you see the speaker cone going like this, because the bottom end is boosted way the hell up, and it's getting, that's why turntables feed back and all that. Okay, so anyway, so that was that. Then the moving magnet cartridge came out. So this guy decided to forget the RIA curve for a second. This had a whole different frequency response, way, way better. So he came up with a curve to match this cartridge, right? And so I heard this thing, and it was the closest thing I ever heard to tape in my life. It was amazing. But guess what? It was rejected because of the fact that it was squashed, because everybody had, going back to 78, everybody had stuff with the RIA curve on it. And so it was already well ensconced, and it was too late to change it. And so it just fell on its face, that thing that was way, way better. Now let's talk about digital. So now we're saddled with this thing, PCM. So I'm up somewhere like in Yosemite or something, and we've got this rented car, and it's got Sirius XM in it, right? They got the vinyl channel, channel 26, right?
Okay.
Okay, so my wife and I, my wife way into all this too, and so we're listening to the vinyl channel, and I can recognize, see, the problem with what people don't realize, vinyl records that are cut from digital tapes, what they are CDs with ticks and pops on them. They are not, they are not analog.
No.
I mean, if you have an analog, what the lathe will do, a vinyl record, whatever you put in, you get out, right? So if you put in analog, you get analog out. Yeah. But if you put in digital, you get digital out, even though it's on a record, right?
That's right.
Okay, so now I can hear the difference. But anyway, we would muscle test each other in the car. Like I'd say, that's digital, and then I was usually right, Anyway, we did it. So then I started thinking about this, and I thought to myself, wait a second. Now, this is what went through my mind. I thought, wait a second now. I said, this signal is going up to a satellite, and that's got to be digital going up to that satellite. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how's that possible? So I was thinking, not knowing, I thought, well, I was thinking they were using PCM to go up to the satellite. Now I was thinking that's absolutely impossible. So when I got home, I did some research, and lo and behold, they wrote their own digital software that was what should have been done in the first place, rather than use PCM, right? And it doesn't have any of these problems, just like that phono cartridge thing I was just describing, right? And basically they did that because they didn't want the Chinese to steal the signal off the satellites, right? So it's encrypted and all that stuff, but it's also not PCM, and it doesn't have any problems. See, isn't that interesting? What happened with vinyl happened with digital. Exactly.
How's your hearing?
I mean, I took really good care of it. There was this doctor in Beverly Hills that I used to go to every 6 months. I can almost remember his name.
Did you listen to music loud when you worked in the studio, or were you somebody says, let's just...
No, well, the thing that's interesting about it is that it's all the duration. When you hear loud music, it's okay, even if it's really, really loud for like 10 minutes or something. Okay. But as it goes, when you start to get up to 30 minutes, you're starting to do some damage. And if you go into like hours, it's going to be really bad. And it's really interesting. Like Keith's hearing isn't, like Pete Townshend's hearing is really bad, and Eric Clapton's hearing is really bad because they played with stacks.
Those Marshalls.
And the amps were at their ear level.
Oh my God.
Now the Stones have never done that. The amps are down there, right?
Yeah.
So Keith never got it straight in his ear, right? But when you get it straight in your ear, you're really screwed, right? Yeah. So anyway, so I'd get my hearing checked all the time. I'd also wear earplugs when I went to shows, and then near field monitors became popular way early in the game. And of course, you listen loud, but you might play something back loud, really loud, so the art, for that kind of thing,
the artist wants to feel
in the
that.
control room, you know what I mean. But that's only 3 minutes, right? So or 4 minutes, so that's no big deal. But no long duration thing. So I took good care of my ears, but there's no way that you're not going to lose your high end as you get older. I mean,
it's
just the nature of the situation. But I went and tried a hearing aid, and it bugged the hell out of me. And that's the other thing that's interesting is about RealFeel with hearing aids, because the big problem with digital hearing aids that everybody tells me. So I actually there's a guy named George Kieh. He invented the Stellavox, which is a miniature version of the Nagra. And he was in Switzerland. So he had gotten in touch with me. He heard about what I was doing. And he built this really incredible analog hearing aid. It was unbelievable. I mean, but it was big. And so anyway, it was great. So then he wanted to do a digital one. So he said, I want you to come over and I want to put RealFeel on the hearing aid, on the digital one, and compare it to the analog one. So we went and did that, right? So there was this woman that was 25 years old that lost her hearing when she was about 18. So she knew what it was like to hear, right? But she didn't lose it completely, but quite a bit, right? So she had hearing aids, right? So we put these hearing aids on her, and we were outdoors, and she started crying. And she said, I could hear the wind, and she said, and she rubbed her feet on the grass. I can hear that. She said, I can't hear that with the other one. And then she said, and you know, the biggest thing is I can tell which direction the sound is coming from, and that is what everybody says about digital hearing aids. They can't tell which direction the sound.
It just grabs the room.
But you want to hear something more amazing? Listen to this. So there's this guy Hugo Zuccarelli, and he invented the holographic microphone, right? So he had his lab was for a timestamp. It was when they started the Discovery Channel. It was in Santa Monica, and so that was like in the 70s, right? So anyway, so one day he's in bed. It's a Sunday, it's sleeping in, and the theory about how you localize hearing is that the sound comes to your two ears at different times, and that's how you figure out where things are coming from, right? So he's got his head on the pillow, and he's got one ear exposed, and his wife's walking around in the bedroom, and he can tell exactly where she is, and he thinks to himself, wait a second, this can't be possible. So then he takes his finger and sticks it in the other ear, really completely gets rid of the sound in the other ear, and he can localize her perfectly, and he says, oh, okay, something's wrong. Guess what? So you produce a tone. Everybody produces a tone, and it's like a fingerprint. Everybody's tone is just slightly different, right? Then you have a notch filter in your brain that notches that tone out so you don't hear it. So when your ears ring or you have tinnitus, what's happening is your notch filter's off center. And then the reason your ears ring when you hear really loud sound is you get what's called threshold shift. So your threshold of hearing changes, and when that happens, your notch filter goes off as well. So that's why your ears are ringing. Okay, so what happens is the sound comes in and gets phase compared against that tone that your brain produces, and that's how you localize sound.
Well,
Isn't that amazing?
I'm dealing with that.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with that now.
With tinnitus, you mean?
Yeah, but it's not like upsetting. It's just at a certain age, you start to get this white noise thing, right?
Yeah.
And
there's different kinds. I mean, there's either that white noisy kind, or there's the tone kind, and it can be very high frequencies. It can vary around.
Right.
But everybody's tone is like between 2,000 and 3,000 cycles.
All right. Is there something here that's a solution for that?
Not really, no.
Because I went to a hearing, they went, no, you just deal with it.
No, there's a guy, Tomatisse, that was this French doctor that was the ultimate hearing guy of all time.
Okay.
And he had this thing called sound therapy that it was really an interesting thing because I had a handicapped son and I was doing all these studies and so Neil Young has really bad tinnitus, and so I gave this sound therapy thing to Neil, and he said it really helped him. You wore this thing. You listen to it every day for like an hour or whatever it was, and it was like this classical music, and it sounded really weird, like really exaggerated high frequencies or something. But it did something to your ears, like it made some kind of adjustment. Does it pull
this whole thing back in
and
balance?
It reduced the tinnitus, the relative level of tinnitus to your regular hearing. It does help.
Let me ask last.
But this doesn't fix that.
No.
RealFeel.
Okay. Last question here. You're here for. The RealFeel was one thing, but the other one is PEMF device.
Yeah, that's this thing here.
Okay, what are we looking here?
This is a pulse electromagnetic frequency device. So this is a brainwave entrainment. That's what pulse electromagnetic frequencies do. And when we were talking about the digital analog thing, so fluorescent lights and digital knock your left and right brain hemispheres out of sync, about 5 to 7%. That's what happens, right? That causes stress. The stress causes you to lose your strength when you do the muscle test, right? So you turn this thing on, and your brain immediately entrains to this, and your brain hemispheres both sync up to it. And so it's really interesting. Like, there's a frequency on here that's like drinking a cup of coffee, and like if you're reading difficult material and you're having a hard time concentrating, that has to do with how well your brain hemispheres are in sync. And this, you wouldn't believe how much difference this makes with respect to that.
And you've had this for what, 30 years?
Yeah, in 1982 I got that.
82, you got into this.
Yeah.
And how far along now is this, and how is this being used now?
Well, there's a device in Germany that, people know about this now. Like there's one that somebody sells for sleeping that has a thing that's like the size of a hockey puck,
Yeah.
and it's got a wire on it, and then it's got a box like the size of a cable TV box. And so then you put this hockey puck thing under your pillow, and then you turn this box on and it helps you sleep, right? So that's that's becoming more and more prevalent. But see, the thing about this is it affects a 10-foot radius, a 20-foot circle.
Okay.
Whereas there's one in Germany is $1,000. It's about the size of an iPhone. You stick it in your pocket. It does a 5-foot circle, right? But it's also $1,000. We're going to put this on the market for like $300 or something, you know.
Okay, and when will this happen? How far?
I don't know because this took the back seat to RealFeel, but
I got you.
And RealFeel's like been 39 years in the making, right? But this is what I used as a benchmark to test with the muscle testing stuff while I was trying to get RealFeel to work.
Right.
I would, in other words, I'd play digital audio, I'd muscle test it with test weak, I'd turn this on and you'd test strong, but it's varying degrees of strength, and depending on the sampling frequency, the higher the sampling frequency up to a point, the less it throws you off. But anyway, I use this as a reference point to develop RealFeel.
Right.
That's
Great.
it.
This has been Conversations in All Keys. Bill King, live from the Redwood Theater. Thank you.
Thank you.